Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm so honored to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, Child and Teen Development Specialist, author and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two great kids who give me the opportunity to love, learn, and grow every single day, whether I want to or not. Believe me, I get it. It's not always easy, but we're in this together, and thankfully, we have some wonderful people helping us along the way. Now, all kids get anxious about some things. In fact, anxiety is a perfectly normal response to something dangerous or stressful. We've talked about anxiety in the past, and in particular fear with Dr. Andrea Umbach, as well as how to outsmart worry with Dr. Dawn Huebner. Anxiety itself becomes problematic when it prevents us from doing the activities we love and the normal everyday activities we have to do. Anxiety can show up without warning, get into our heads, and govern how we think, how we feel, how we act. And as you can imagine, or you may know firsthand, anxiety can feel terrible. And as a parent, teacher, or coach watching it take hold of a child, it can be confusing to know what to do, what to say, and how to help a child get through it. To help us know exactly how to handle anxiety in children, I'm delighted to be interviewing Karen Young. Karen Young has worked as a psychologist in private practice and in educational settings. She founded the popular website Hey Sigmund, which attracts millions of readers each year. Karen is a sought-after speaker both at home in Australia and internationally. She's the author of Hey Warrior, a book for kids to help them understand anxiety and find their brave. The book has been translated into a number of languages, and we couldn't be more thrilled to welcome her to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. So welcome, Karen, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Well, I am really looking forward to it as well. I know you are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed because it is morning right there. And here I'm in my jammies all ready to interview you as it's the night before. So I'm so excited that, we were able to find a time. But it's just so funny that we are on two totally different continents and two totally different days.
It is. It's a bit of a head spin, but we did it. So that's the best thing.
Yes, we did it. So before we get into the meat of the matter, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read all of your articles and your book, can you tell us what gets you up in the morning and what got you so interested in helping kids cope with anxiety?
It actually got personal for me. So when I was in private practice, I actually realized that a lot of people just needed the information, and there are a lot of people who need that support of therapy. But then when people have the right information, they can do really great things with it, and kids can do really great things with it. So the reason I started Hey Sigmund was to put out the information that we had as psychologists and therapists and make it really accessible to everybody, really. It's all about broadening social intelligence, emotional intelligence, psychological health, all of those really important things that will really build kids up to full flight. So that's why I did it. But the thing, so I started Hey Sigmund as just a general information. It was never really intended to be for kids. It was never intended to be about anxiety, but I think the path widens to send you where you're meant to go. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened to me. So my daughter was she was 12 and she was moving from the junior school to the middle school, which is just across the road at her school. And she's at this really gorgeous school. It's a reasonably small girls' school, so it was just across the road. And she always liked school, so I get a lot of emails from people saying, but there's no problem at school, but my kids get really anxious about going or teary at drop-off. But the teacher says there's no problems and they like their teacher and they've got some friends and they're doing okay. And that's what anxiety does. It's a sneaky little beast and it doesn't necessarily have a real reason. So she just had to go from the junior school on one side of the road to the senior school on the other, and she started getting really anxious at the start of the year. She didn't name it as anxiety. She just named it. She was getting tummy aches and headaches and just feeling teary for no reason. So we were having these conversations, and I just kind of thought, oh, you know, it's a new year. It's a big year. She'll be okay. And then it actually started to generalize, which is what anxiety can do. So we were on our way to soccer one day, and she said, "Mum, I've got that feeling again," and I knew what it was, and because she loves soccer, it was her thing, and she loved the other girls in her team. She loved her coach. It was really, there was nothing bad about soccer to trigger anxiety. And so then we had the conversation about it. And do you know, I actually missed it. So I tell people this because I think as parents, we can often whip ourselves when we don't get it right all the time. So she had this anxiety and I was going, maybe she just needs more sleep or maybe she just does. And my husband said to me, you know, we've got to get this sore tummy checked out. And as soon as he said that, I just went, oh, no, I know exactly what it is. And I said, you know, no, this isn't a tummy thing, this is an anxiety thing, and I need to talk to her about it. And I think when it's your own kids, they're not going to do therapy with me. So all the things that I used to do, and we actually know a lot more about the brain now too, which is a really great thing. You know, so I just had to have a mum-daughter chat with her about it really gently. And I said, do you get this? And we went through the symptoms. Do your muscles feel tight sometimes? Do you sometimes feel like you just want to burst into tears? Do you get a sick tummy? Do you get butterflies? Yeah. And I said, you know, I think you've got this thing called anxiety. And we went through it. And then I said to her, so really, it's nothing to worry about. It's really normal. And I had the full conversation with her. And I said, but this is how it works. And we went through the full description about anxiety. And soccer is a 15-minute trip, so this all happened in 15 minutes. It wasn't like a discussion. And then I said, so there's some things you need to do. Exercise is really great, but you're getting that at soccer. Do mindfulness because that changes your brain and it'll quiet that warrior amygdala that's trying to look after you and protect you but is doing it a bit too much. And it'll strengthen that front part of your brain that can actually help calm the amygdala. And so we used all the right words, and I said, and the other thing you need to do is breathe because that switches off, it calms your amygdala. And I wasn't sure how it'd land, but then 2 weeks later she came back to me and she said, Mum, that stuff you said's really helped me. And she did mindfulness in that 2 weeks. And so that was when I kind of thought, oh, okay, because I think when they tell you at 12 that something's working, then it's working. You know, they're really honest at that age. And so then I just started, I said to her one night, are you okay if I write about this on my website? And it was when my website was quite new, and I said to her, not many people read my website, so it's okay. And then that was the article that did it for me. And then the book came off that. And I think, you know, when I thought about it, I thought, well, it makes sense because kids want to know how their bodies work. They want to know why does it feel like this? Why is this happening to me? Why is it happening when there's nothing to feel worried about? Why do I feel worried like this when I know everything's okay? Why do I feel like I'm going to vomit? Why? And that conversation put everything in context. It also, I think, puts the strategies, it makes the strategies make sense because if you say to someone just do mindfulness, they won't necessarily do it unless, you know, they know why. Same with breathing. So it made things make sense. So that's kind of the long story of how I came on the anxiety. And I still write, about everything, but anxiety is my thing because I got personal.
Right. When it gets personal and you're both the parent and the expert, it certainly collides, and you have such insight. So many of the things that you said really triggered a lot in me. And we know that anxiety happens to so many people. But what do you think is the answer of why anxiety happens in children? And what do the children really need to know about anxiety? What would you say would be the top things that they really need to know about anxiety?
So, first, as to why it happens, some kids are just more vulnerable. So the most important thing, first, that I want parents to know is parents don't cause anxiety, because kids, the vulnerability is there. It also comes with a lot of strength. So if you're going to feel bad about the anxiety, then you have to take credit for the strengths these kids have as well, and there are billions of them. It's nature nurture. So there is the vulnerabilities there, but then sometimes in the environment it can it can bring it out more. So things like really loving parents can do things inadvertently, like support avoidance, or do things that seem to be supporting kids, but actually it's supporting anxiety. And I want to say I've done all of them myself, because we get desperate as parents sometimes, and you just do things.
Oh, so avoidance, you get nervous when you are around whatever person or dog or whatever, and you then don't go around that particular person or that dog, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you organize the environment to basically, you organize the environment to accommodate. And that's a really loving thing to do, but it actually can make anxiety worse, because the brain changes through experience and strengthens through experience. So the more kids are exposed to experiences that confirm that avoidance feels good, the more that wiring will strengthen around the only way I can feel safe is to avoid.
So interesting. Yes, sure.
Yeah. And so anxiety, because anxiety is just there to protect us. It's not a bad thing. It feels bad, but it's actually there to help us and look after us. And that's why we need it. We just need it not to be there when we don't need it. So if your brain is wiring in a way that forces that's driving avoidance, then that anxiety will get more fierce in those situations. So, and then it can start to generalize to other situations. So if it's avoidance of unfamiliar people at school, that can generalize to lots of things. So I don't want to try it for the soccer team because I'm not sure how it's going to be, or avoidance of anything which isn't as predictable or as under our control. But, we can manage that. We can turn it around. We just need the right information. So that's what I could say. But the anxiety was already there. So it's not like parents created that. The anxiety or the vulnerability to anxiety was already there. So to kids, I would say, I think it's really important that kids understand the emails I get from teens, not so much the littles, but the teens, from 10 on, I get emails and they say, there are two things they say. I feel like I'm the only one who happens to, and I feel like a bit of a freak.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. And the other thing that I hear is I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to tell. I'm embarrassed about it.
Right.
Or I did try to tell somebody, but they just said that I just need to deal with it.
Yeah, just get over it. Right.
Yeah,
That's
and
helpful.
I think that's a reflection, though, of how helpless people can feel in the fact, like parents, it's like, well, I know you're telling me this and I love you and I want to help you, but I don't know what to do, so it's not necessarily being dismissive, but more, I don't know what to do to help you. And I know I've been in that position before. I just don't know, not with anxiety, but other things. And I go, I don't know what to do. So, you really just need to move through this because there's no easy answer. if I don't have, what it takes to deal with it.
Right, because people just assume that the experience of going through it will prove to that child that they had nothing to be nervous about in the first place.
That's right. And that's what we want. We want to encourage brave behaviour, but it has to be brave behaviour with a scaffold, brave behaviour with information, brave behaviour with support, so that they can understand why they're feeling like it. So that takes the fear away, takes away the anxiety about the anxiety, and there's strategies that they can put in place while they're going through it. So the things I'd want kids to know are this is a really normal human response. Anxiety means that your brain's doing exactly what strong, healthy brains are meant to do, which is keep you safe. So it's happening a bit too often and a bit too much when you actually don't need protecting. And the thing about that too is because, back when we were cave people, they probably would have been the leaders of the pack because that capacity to detect threat would have kept everybody safe. It's the reason we survived for so long. The difference now is back then the threats were physical, so that response would be there when there actually probably was a need for fight or flight. The difference now is the threats are more psychological, still as real and fierce and frightening, but it's threats of, humiliation, embarrassment, separation, loss, grief, loss. But all of those things that we all struggle with as humans, but it can go boom for people with anxiety and really cause trouble. But there's no reason for fight or flight. So you're stuck in a situation where your body's gearing itself for action, but there's no action needed. And that's where all the horrible physical symptoms come from. So so kids need to understand it's actually, they're not broken and it's really normal. And everybody gets anxiety. It's on some level before an exam, before an interview. It's really normal, but it's just happening too much. They also need to know that it's manageable and that there are things they can do. And I think that speaks to the, I feel alone, I don't know what to do, but also probably more that's what the important adults in their lives need to know is what to tell them or, about the strategies. This is what you need to know and this is what you need to do. And you need to be patient with these strategies because your brain's pretty great at this fight or flight thing, so it might take a while to turn it around, but it will.
So before we get into the scaffold and the strategies, which I'm absolutely incredibly interested in, I just want to put high beams on one area that you had mentioned, that it seems like often when kids are anxious about something, that they don't necessarily say, hey, mom, dad, teacher, coach, I'm anxious about something. It comes out in different ways. And one of the things you said was it can come out as a bellyache. But I'm just wondering if you could tell us, for those listening, how else it could come out so that we can be ready when we see a child perhaps have either a physical or a behavioral response, and maybe they don't even know that it's anxiety, just like your daughter, but we can maybe put a name to it at the time when we see it.
That's a really great question. So there's a few things that it can look like. So it can look like the physical symptoms. It can look like the tummy aches, headaches, because anxiety can hurt because it's physically, it's draining and it's a physiological response. It can also look like avoidance. So, but the avoidance isn't always obvious. So it can be things like, I don't want to try out for the drama club, or I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to go to the party. I don't want to go to grandma and granddad's for a sleepover. It can look like that sort of avoidance. Mm-hmm. But then there's the less obvious avoidance, which it's things like kids might say, no, I'm just going to go to the library at lunch, because they might not want to expose themselves to, well, I don't even know which group of friends to go to, and that would be really embarrassing if they said no to me, so I'm just going to avoid all of that, because that's a threat. Mm-hmm. It's a threat to a brain that's anxious. and I'll go to the library. It can also look like perfectionism, which is not so much perfectionism is driven by anxiety, and it's not so much about wanting to be perfect, but about wanting to avoid the any consequences of not being perfect. So making a mistake or getting it wrong or having or judgment. Or
so
criticism.
Feeling embarrassed and feeling like you're going to make a fool out of yourself.
Yeah. So it can look like that thing of doing work over and over. Sometimes it's not getting work finished or spending way too long on homework or work in class, and that's because they just keep doing it over and over to get it right. It can look like not even attempting things because it's easy not to get it wrong if you don't attempt it.
Exactly.
Now, the other important ways anxiety can show itself, anxiety is fight or flight. So fight's the avoidance, we know that, but it's also fight. The amygdala, which looks after anxiety, which is responsible for, the anxiety response, the fight or flight response, also is in charge of big emotions like sadness and anger. So when kids are anxious, that amygdala is switched to high volume, and so emotions will be too. So kids might really get really angry, or it might be a tantrum, or they might get really aggressive, and that can actually be driven by anxiety. Now, the thing is, if you treat that as bad behaviour, that's going to make the anxiety worse, and it's going to make the response worse. It might settle it, in the moment, but it's not going to fix the problem. So it's really important to recognise that. And the way to, it can also look like, before I go into that, it can also look like kids bursting into tears for no reason, and that's because that sadness is switched to high volume. So they might not know why they're sad, but when you're crying, you feel that sadness anyway. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's sadness there. It can actually be anxiety. So if they're on their way to school and they burst into tears, that can be the work of anxiety. Now, if it's anxiety, it's likely that there'll be other signs. So there'll probably be the worrying thoughts, which are what if you don't pick me up on time, but what if I don't have anyone to play with, and like somewhere in there, and not necessarily in the moment, but somewhere in there. There might be sick tummies, butterflies, tense muscles, headaches, rosy cheeks. That's a clue that all this stuff is being driven by anxiety. So it's got a few different ways of showing itself. In school, it can actually be the class clown, and they look like sometimes the most confident kids in class, but it's a way to distract from the worrying thoughts, because worrying thoughts are so just pervasive and intrusive, and it's actually a really creative adjustment kids have made to pull out of that. So
I can imagine that the people who are listening right now, I mean, I can feel it in my own self, because I'm thinking, I am certain that I've made this mistake before, that, my child was angry or upset or saying things like, I hate you, or I'm not going, or whatever. And then you're addressing the behavior at that time because you're in a rush and you're a parent and you're not perfect. So please, anybody who's listening, we get it. We're all there. We're all with you.
I've done it myself. I've done it myself so many times.
Right. We all do it. It makes no difference how much we know about this.
Absolutely. We're all human.
Yeah. So if that does happen and we see that behavioral response and we remember this podcast and we think to ourselves, this is probably not a bad behavior circumstance. This is not defiance to be defiant, because children really do not want to get in trouble like this. No. What is it that we can do in that circumstance, in the throw of the tantrum, in the, in the situation where the child does burst in tears? What do we do in that situation, or what do we not do in that situation?
So all we can do is respond to all kids don't want to be bad. Kids don't do stuff. It looks like bad behavior, but all of their behavior is driven by a need. It's a really messy way to meet the need, but it's all driven by a need. Kids don't do this stuff just to cause trouble. Right. There's a reason for it, and they're still growing and they're still learning self-control, so they're going to get it wrong, and we get it wrong. We lash out at times. Absolutely. Or we'll say the wrong thing. So of course they're going to. So when they're in it, when kids are in that high emotion, and actually when any of us are in high emotion, the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, is actually overwhelmed, and it kind of goes offline. So it's not there to take in, and that's the part of the brain that can problem solve and think through consequences and actually take in rational, logical information. Right. So forget about trying to reason.
Exactly.
It's not going to do anything, because the part of the brain that can do something with it is out to lunch.
Yeah, so, one of my best friends, who's also a child psychiatrist and who's been on the podcast talking about ADHD, but she talks about it as a gate comes down, and you're not going to get through that gate for about 20 minutes. So you have to wait it out. Yeah.
Absolutely. And brains are really good at what they do. So it will just do, if it thinks that this is what needs to happen, and it's in this fight or flight mode, you're not going to get through. And at the same time, once a child is overwhelmed with this emotion, we just need to ride the wave with them. What they need in that moment, one of the jobs of emotion is to recruit support. So if it's happening in front of you, you're the support.
Right.
What they need to hear is that we get it. And it feels, we need to put boundaries around the behaviour, and there needs to be that conversation. They can't just, do this whenever they want to, but there's a time for that, and it's not in the thick of the emotion. Right. So what we need to do is let them know that we get it. I can see you're really angry right now. I'm just going to stay here with you. I want to hear what you need. Let me know when you're ready for that, because we don't want to leave them out there on their own.
Sure.
We need to keep them safe. So if they're throwing things, or, if they're my son used to do it he's 20 now, he doesn't do it anymore, but he used to do it at the top of the escalators in a shopping centre, always at the top of the escalator.
Of course.
Maximum impact. And so he would just drop and flop and on the floor and start. And I just have to pick him up and take him to the car, and that's where we would, do this. So you take them to a place. Sometimes, you might, especially with older kids, say to them, do you want me to stay with you, or do you need some space? And they might say, I hate you. You need to go away. I don't want anything to do with you. This is the reason you've made me feel like this, and all the rest of it. So you just, step away and give them the space, but not out of reach of them, because so that's you're responding to what they want. So you just go, I'm just over here. Tell me when you want me. Tell me when you're ready, and I'm right here for you. So the whole time we're really respectful of them as humans, because if we're in that space, we might not want people in our face. Right. We might just want to be left alone to just do that thing that we need to do. Right. But we don't want to feel isolated and alone either. And we certainly don't want to feel it as rejection, which is what, traditional timeout does. So it's more about just, honouring them, that they do feel, and that it is big. So the whole time we're just validating and saying, I really understand that you're really angry. I want to understand where this is coming from, and I want to understand what you need. I can't hear you when you're doing this, and I can't understand what you want when you're screaming like this, but when you're ready to talk, tell me, and I'll be here. Then, the emotion will always go. They're not going to stay in that high emotion forever. And then when it goes, that's a conversation, and so they'll have their turn. And we always get more, I think, by listening than by speaking. So first of all, we need to listen, because that opens the door and it opens minds, and then that's when we also say, when we've heard them and go, I understand, I would feel really angry about that too. I really get why why you're angry. I'm making you go to school and you don't want to go to school, or I'm making you, try out for the soccer team and you don't want to. It's really hard, isn't it, when you have to do things that you don't want to do. I understand that. And then you can have the rational conversation with them. But it's not okay to behave like this. It's not okay. It's not okay to do this. It's okay to be angry. Whatever you feel is always okay, but you need to be really careful what you do with it. And then you can discuss the strategies like, breathing, or the one of the ones is the taking some space and imagining the thoughts and feelings, like the angry thoughts forming into clouds and then letting them float away, and that will take practice, or just if they need to, separating themselves, because breathing will always bring back that prefrontal cortex and it initiates the relaxation response. And then you say it doesn't mean you're not going to be angry, and it doesn't mean that it's going to make whatever's making you feel bad go away, but it actually makes you a lot more powerful, because it means that people are more likely to listen to you and going to be more able to talk about what you need. And the thing I say to my kids is you actually lose power when you use that high emotion in a bad way, because people aren't going to hear you and people aren't going to listen to you. Now, that's a conversation that takes years. Like you have this conversation for years and years. It doesn't mean that when you have this conversation or when you name the emotion, because we know that naming emotion starts to soothe the nervous system, and it's helps here. Your recruits here. I'm here. So that amygdala can start to go, oh, phew, we're going to be okay. It's not an instant fix, but it will start the downward, the wave will start to flatten slowly. It also doesn't mean that next time they get anxious or in the same situation they won't do the same thing, but they're kids and they have a long time to learn this, and we have a long time to teach it. I think the most important thing is not to take their behaviour personally, because everything they're doing is, an opportunity to teach them better ways to behave. So it's not a reflection on us as parents. And I think sometimes if we take their bad behaviour personally, that shame can really shut down an effective response, and it stops us seeing them as, as their own people who actually need this information before they can move forward. So we can kind of come in and try to extinguish the behaviour without explanation and without giving them the
Yes, very interesting. And I'm listening to you both as a parent and as a child development specialist, because I think what you're saying is monumentally important, that you recognize that your child is a human being. They're going through a normal response. It's not about you. It's going to come out in all different ways that sound like it is about you some of the time. I hate you. You're terrible. You're the worst mom. I wish, whatever. I wish I was never here. It can sound like slamming doors and, it's horrible screams and cries. And so it can feel very personal, and it's hard to remove yourself from that and to say, this is not about me and I'm here for you, especially when you feel like you're being treated like garbage. It really can be very challenging to put yourself in that situation, be like, hey, I'm here for you. And then recover as a parent or as a teacher or as a coach that has been treated poorly in that situation, to recover and be able to bounce back and not feel angry. It's really a tough position.
But also that idea, I think, of, but am I pandering to them? Am I just making it too easy for them to behave like this in the future?
Right.
And to that I go, no, because they don't want to behave like this. They don't. The issue, it's not. They don't have option B, C, D yet. They're still learning that. So our job as parents is to give them those options. So when you're angry, this is what happens. But do you know what? It will only happen with connection, because they won't learn if they feel disconnected from us. So if we don't recognize that, and if we don't respect that, and give them what we would need in the same situation, which isn't someone getting preachy and judgy and critical, because that will actually probably more drive a defense of the behavior. Well, I wouldn't be
or
doing
you need
this.
to calm down. Like, you need to calm down right now. This doesn't work very well.
I don't think it's in the history of forever it's worked, and it's not going to work with our kids, you know. And then when they get to adolescence, you know, the same thing happens. So we start to see this big behavior again, and that's all part of where they're at in their development and what their brains, you know, the changes that are happening in their brains. I think if we could see inside their heads when they do this, it'd be really easy for us to sit there and go, okay, I really get this and I want to be there for you. I get it. It can be tempting sometimes to feel like we need to, just stomp the behavior out, but then they don't learn. We need to keep that influence and that connection, and that will only happen when they feel respected and loved, and when they feel that sense of warmth from us. They don't want to be doing this. The kids that keep doing it are the ones who will get ignored or rewarded for the behavior. We're not rewarding them. We're coming in, we're validating them, and what we're actually doing is moving them into a space where they can actually hear the really important information that we need to give them about their behavior and about what to do next time. That's what we're doing, and they won't do that if they feel disconnected from us, or if they feel disrespected by us or not seen by us.
Right,
so
right.
It's all part of the it's all about, increasing our influence, and that's what we want, and maximizing it. We do it through connection. Even we don't listen to people we don't like very much, and in that moment, they don't like us. They love us. They don't like us, and we're shifting them to, a zone where it's not so much about like, but where they feel respected by us. We listen to people we respect and who we feel respected by, when there's that mutual respect and validation and connection, and that opens them wide up to what we have to say and opens them wide up to our influence.
It's a beautiful point. I was talking to both Dr. Lynn Kenny and Wendy Young at different times who concentrate on big feelings and younger children often. And, they talk about the conversations that you can have before, during, and after these things are happening. And I'm wondering that once this kind of thing happens, let's say that there was a very big response, and then you did talk to them after about, I understand we can't have this kind of behavior. So then what is the thing we can do the next time? So now we're getting up for school again, or now we're going to the basketball game again, or we're going to the dentist again, and you know what happened the last time. So then what's the scaffold that isn't, playing into it, but yet providing them with what they need in order to feel safe and comfortable the next time?
So I think what they need is the information about what happens to drive those big emotions. If it's anxiety driven, which a lot of this big behaviour is, it's so they need to understand that when you there's a part of so if it's anger driven by anxiety, you're making me do something I don't want to do and I'm really angry about it, the conversation they all need beforehand, and this has to happen in calm times, is about what their brain does during big emotion. So when there's something, when your brain feels like there's something that might hurt you, when there's a threat, and missing out on something you need, not being allowed to, do what your friends are doing, having to do something you don't want to do, which might expose you to criticism or judgment or, failure, that's all a threat. So you have to adapt it to whatever the situation is. What your brain does is, and then we go into there's a part of your brain called the amygdala. It's like a fierce warrior, and it's there to protect you. It's a really small part of your brain, but you need to be the boss of it. Mm-hmm. Because when it senses that something's going to hurt you, it will actually surge you with this neurochemical fuel to get you ready to fight or flee, which is fight. You get angry and you can be aggressive and say things you don't mean, or you can flee, which is you might sulk or just want to go into your, avoid. You'll refuse to do what you need to do. One of the things that happens with that neurochemical fuel, and when there's a real threat, that's a really great thing, because there'll be times, that you want to get out of the way of something, or you want to feel really, you want to fight, not physically and verbally, but you want to, stand against something that is crossing your boundary. But when it's actually a safe thing, and possibly a thing that's really good for you, one of the other things that happens with this, it's like a special body fuel, is it actually sends your thinking brain kind of to sleep. And that's because in that moment, your brain doesn't want you to think too much about whether you should do it, the consequences of what you're doing. It actually just wants to get you safe. So if it thinks that you trying something new might end in judgment or criticism, or you might, you might look silly, it'll try and protect you. And that's a really good thing. But one of the ways it does this is by shutting down your thinking brain, because it says, well, we don't want you to think about the consequences, and we don't want you to think about whether or not it's actually going to happen. We just want you to get safe. And probably the best thing to do is to avoid it, not do it. And probably, we'll give you all of this super body fuel so that you can fight anyone who makes you do it. And that can come out as the verbal lashing, or, for little kids, they're so strong when they're, when they're in that space and when they're thrashing around. That's all because of, this super body fuel. So what you need to do is actually be the boss of your brain, because your brain is really smart, but it can read things wrong sometimes, and it will see things as a threat when it's not a threat, when actually it's really brave. It'll, it's not going to hurt you. It's going to be something that'll be really a really great thing for you potentially, but also sometimes things are worth the risk, because that's how you train your brain to do brave things. So the more you avoid it, the more you're telling your brain, well, that's okay, you can just control when I do this stuff, and I'll leave it to you. So what you need to do when this is happening is be the boss of your brain, because otherwise it'll land you in loads of trouble if you do. The best way to be the boss of your brain is actually to breathe, because the first thing that happens when this fight or flight response is happening is you start breathing short, sharp breaths, and that's so your body can save. Your body saying to your brain saying to your body, don't use up oxygen on slow, deep, strong breaths, because we might need to send it to the muscles so they can fight or flee. Now, when that happens, that kind of starts the cascade of effects. So when you breathe deeply, when you take strong, deep breaths, that is sending a message to you. It starts to calm that fierce warrior amygdala in you, and it starts to let that amygdala know that you're in charge now, that you've got this, and that you can handle this. And because your brain will always listen to you, but you need to give it some instruction sometimes.
Right.
So that conversation has to happen when you're calm,
right?
Because, like I said, they can't take it. So, and start to talk to them about, what's your first clue when you're about to get angry? What's your first clue? Is it, and they might not know, but just if you give them the language, it starts to turn their attention to it, because there will be a series of things that happen. What's happening at the moment, there's a thought and a response, and it's very quick. It's very, very quick. So we want to try and expand that. And there'll be signs in their body, there'll be sensations that are giving them a clue that I'm about to get really angry, or I'm about to do, behave in a way that probably won't be good for me. It might be a racy heart. It might be, they might feel warm in their face. It might be just this extra energy, like they can just, that's making them fidgety, or, and it's about starting. So there can be a conversation about that. And it's really about just starting to tune their awareness in and to teach them that they can actually change this. And then the thing to say is, so when that happens, start to take strong, deep breaths. So you can imagine you've got a cup of hot cocoa and you breathe out first, and then you smell it for 3, hold it for 1, and blow it cool for 3. That doesn't mean you won't feel angry. You might still feel angry if there's something there that's upsetting you. But what it lets you do is it lets you stay powerful enough to deal with it in a way that will be better for you, because no one is going to listen to you when you're not going to get what you need when you're screaming, or when you're being mean to people, or saying things that don't land well. So what we want to do is find a way that you can actually keep your power and hold on to it, and use it in a way that's going to get you more understanding and more likely to get what you need. And we can talk about it. It doesn't mean you're going to be able to avoid doing things that you don't want to do. But what it's going to mean is you're actually in control of what your body's doing and what your brain's doing, and you're more likely to have influence when you're not lashing out.
So is that where the mindfulness piece comes in then? Is that where you would talk about mindfulness and really being present in your body?
Yeah, so what mindfulness, I think all kids should do mindfulness. I think if there's one thing all kids do, it should be mindfulness. What mindfulness does, and the way you can explain it, is when your brain thinks that there's something that's going to hurt you, it will react, and before you know it, you're screaming or saying horrible things. What mindfulness does is it actually starts to expand the space so that you can have a thought or a feeling like you're going to get angry, but there's more of a gap between that and the response. So you've actually got those really precious moments to decide, do I want to start saying this stuff? Do I want to start thrashing around? Do I want to run away and hide in my room? Or do I want to stay powerful? And do I want to have influence? What mindfulness does is it actually decreases activity in the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that senses threat. So it's like, well, it's the part of the brain that it's like that fierce warrior part of the brain. It increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that can actually control or calm big emotion and think of consequences and problem solve. So what would be a better plan than the one which involves me getting into trouble? It also strengthens the connection between the two, because when the connection between them is strong, the messages travel faster. So it's less likely to keep that gate. That gate's going to be slower to come down.
Right.
So the amygdala is saying to the prefrontal cortex, this is a threat, you better get out of here because we need to deal with that. The prefrontal cortex is more able to say, actually, no, there's a better way to deal with this. You need to sit out and let me take control of it. So it's that flow backwards and forwards of information. It also, the other great thing about mindfulness in relation to anxiety, which can drive these big feelings, is anxiety is future thinking. So it's, but what if this happens? What if I'm forced to do this thing and I get really embarrassed and then everyone hates me and I'm alone for the rest of my life.
Oh gosh.
I don't know how their stories end, but they're fierce and they don't even need to make sense for the brain to react to them. That's the brain will just react. What mindfulness does, that's all future thinking, and anxiety is future thinking. What mindfulness does is it trains the brain to stay in the present. So right now, I'm safe. Right now, this is what's happening, and it's less likely to engage in all that catastrophic thinking. So that's where, and there's so much research. Mindfulness has been shown to just be so powerful in strengthening kids against anxiety and increasing their self-control with these big feelings. It's really extraordinary. But again, that conversation has to happen when they come. And again, you know, a week of mindfulness isn't necessarily going to stop these big feelings. But what we need to remember is we've got these kids in our hands for a long time. So we've got time for them to learn this stuff. The main thing is that the conversations and the connection and influence are there so that we can actually have the conversations in a way that are heard by these kids.
You know, it's funny because I just wrote an article recently on anticipated homesickness. So, you know, the idea that mainly because my own kids, especially my daughter, has anticipated homesickness when it comes to a sleepover or, you know, sleeping out of the house, going on an overnight, going to camp, you know, in terms of, especially if she's going to be away from me for an extended period of time. So it really resonates with me when you're saying that it's future thinking, because it is. This is not happening right now.
Yeah.
You're not in camp. You're not at a sleepover. And yet you are worried that you will be homesick, that you will miss me, and that you are going to want to come home, and that you're going to have to pee in the middle of the night and nobody's going to be there, that you are going to be lonely, you're not going to know where your stuffed animal is, whatever it is, that all of this future thinking that happens. So in the, or with the sense of, you know, the kids who are nervous about going to the dentist, they're not in the dentist chair. They're thinking about how they will go tomorrow. And I know my friend says to me, you know, she doesn't even tell her son that they're going to the doctor until that morning, because otherwise he won't sleep the night before. So what you're saying, it sounds like, is that if they're able to practice mindfulness and say to themselves, okay, I'm safe now. This is my current situation now, and stay in the moment instead of doing this catastrophic thinking and this sort of future thinking, this anticipated worry, that they'll be able to conquer a lot of the anxiety that they feel.
Well, the thing is, they might still get anxious because that brain is still going, oh, I'm not sure about this. This could be risky. But they need to understand, because the thing about anxiety is the feelings and the thoughts feel real. And the reason it's so hard to respond as parents is because they're often plausible.
Right, they are.
You might lose your toy in the middle of the night, and, you know, and that might happen. And often separation anxiety is around, well, what if something happens at home while I'm not around?
Right.
Well, you say, but we're safe, we're going to be okay. They go, but it might, and you can't, you know,
and you can't say it won't happen, because that's not helpful either.
No. So there are two things. What they need to understand is, even though the thoughts and feelings feel so, validate, that's a really scary thought for you. I really get that. And actually it happens to me. I worry about that too. But do you know what I've learned? I've learned that when I'm actually in the situation, I can actually handle anything. I can handle when unexpected things happen at camp, or when there's something, you know, that I didn't predict. I can actually handle it. I understand that you probably won't believe me, and you probably won't believe me when I say that you'll be okay through this, and you don't have to. But just be aware that where this is coming from is your brain is getting you ready just in case. It's just in case. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's a thought. It's not a prediction. And your brain is really good at protecting you. And it's why kids with anxiety are often really organised, and because they've been looking around the corner since they knew that corner was coming, and they're anticipating, so they're planning for, you know, all different sorts of things that can happen. So, you know, it comes with its strengths.
So then, is it part of it to ask them, because I certainly have done this with my own daughter, and said, what what will make you feel more calm and less scared? What can you do for yourself? What is the thing? What can you have with you? What can you do in advance that will help you?
Yeah. And if they say nothing, I think, because some of them do, they go, well, nothing, because if it happens, it's just going to be a disaster and I'm going to be really sad and, nothing can help me. And then the thing to say is, your brain is really good at telling you that things could go wrong. You've got a really strong brain. What you need to do is be the boss of that. And it's about tweaking their self-talk, because at the moment their self-talk is, if this happens, it'll be a disaster and I won't cope. So slowly and gently, and again, this is something, that takes time to develop, we need to work on I understand it's really scary for you, and I understand it's a real worry for you. I get that. And I feel it too when I'm away from home. If there isn't anything that you think can help, I want you to know that I know you're brave enough to get through anything. And you can do this. And if you've got times before where they've felt anxious and it's been okay, talk to them about that. There's the history.
Yes, the evidence. Show them the evidence.
Yeah. So remember when you were really worried about this, when it did go wrong, remember it did go wrong for you then, and you dealt with it beautifully. It was really hard. It was really hard. But those uncomfortable feelings and those bad feelings, it doesn't mean that it's a disaster. It just means you're actually going through something that's unfamiliar and that you're actually doing something brave. Right. And that's a good thing. And the more you do it, the more you'll be able to cope when things go wrong, because things aren't always going to go wrong.
Because you're training your brain and your body, and the experience becomes the teacher.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we do our top tip, I just would like to ask, because we have a lot of teachers and coaches listening in, if you have a child who tends to maybe freeze up or has mental blocks, in front of the larger group, they're, bright and creative, but they don't show it in the large group, or they have a mental block in front of a lot of people. What can you give us for advice to the teacher or the coach who's dealing with that type of child?
Oh, that's another really good question. Anxiety locks up the brain. So during anxiety, the prefrontal cortex, which is that thinking part of the brain, as we've been saying, gets sent offline. So when if kids are put on the spot, if they're, and it's things like, I'm going to go around the class and I'm going to ask, I'm going to choose people randomly. Oh, that makes me lock up. So, that sort of thing, you do that, and what that's doing is just dumping these kids in a situation where their anxiety is probably going to go through the roof.
They're not even hearing what you said. They probably don't even hear the question you've asked at that point. Right. They're so worried.
No, that's right. And sometimes they won't hear the instructions because their brain is locked.
And then they might think, then the teacher or the coach is thinking that they're being careless or rude, or they're having a behavioral response when it's actually anxiety in that same sense.
That's right. And so the key with that is to actually wait for the anxiety to go. But I do think kids need this information too. When that amygdala, when that fierce warrior thinks it needs to protect you, one of the things it does is it shuts your thinking brain down. And the way to bring your thinking brain back on again, the easiest way is actually to breathe strong, deep breaths, because strong, deep breathing is like a lullaby for your amygdala, and it will bring your thinking brain, it will start to neutralize that special body fuel, and it will start to send a message to your amygdala that you're okay. It will bring your thinking brain back online, and you'll start to feel okay. You might still feel a bit worried, but it will unlock that thinking part of your brain, and it will start to do what you need to do.
That's brilliant for mental blocks especially.
Yeah, it's why kids will sometimes, and kids need this information, because otherwise what happens is the more they lock up, the more anxious they get, so the more they lock up. But what we need to do is come in there with oh no, that's okay. What happens is you're feeling anxious and your brain, your amygdala has just shut down your thinking brain just for a little while because it thinks it needs you to fight or flight or danger. You just need to be the boss of your brain again. And strong, deep breathing is actually the best way to do that. Or if they're in a situation, physical activity, because physical activity is the natural end to the fight or flight response. It's all there to get us, physically ready for a response. So if they run up and down the stairs, or if that'll burn that neurochemical fuel. Mm-hmm. Because what happens if there is so in class when they're sitting down, or even if they're standing still on a soccer field or something, mm-hmm. and they're anxious, that neurochemical fuel is surging, getting them ready to fight or flee. It's shutting down the thinking brain because it's going, don't think too hard about this, just get safe, just fight, just run. That's basically, in the crudest sense, what's happening. And it's really fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. And so when there's nothing to burn that neurochemical, that chemicals fuel off, it builds up. And that's when anxiety feels the way it does. And what strong, deep breathing does is it switches that response off. It starts to neutralize that surge. So it brings everything back to the way it should be. But mm-hmm. Kids need to understand that, because what happens is they'll go into exams, they'll get really anxious. And honestly, the number of times I've heard from kids and they go, I knew what it was, but I couldn't find the answer. Sure. What it was. I go, well, of course, and that's really understandable because your brain locked up. But that's okay because it happens, yes. And this is how to unlock it, by breathing.
Well, that was brilliant. Thank you. I bet you a lot of teachers and coaches are saying thank you for that. That's really helpful. At this point, I would love to get your top tip. So out of everything we spoke about, or maybe not even, what is your top tip to help kids with anxiety?
I think the most important thing for anxiety is having them understand what happens in their brain, right. Because anxiety feels bad. Those bad feelings feed into the thoughts that, well, if I feel this way, something bad must be going to happen, because that's how it feels. Those thoughts then feed back into the physiological response, which feeds back. What the information does is it short circuits it all, mm-hmm. and it just presses reset. Right. Oh, the reason I feel like this is because my amygdala, my brain, thinks there's something it needs to protect me from, and it's surging me with this special body fuel to get me ready to fight or flight. Mm-hmm. I don't need to fight or flee, so it's making my it's building up. Mm-hmm. It's also, the symptoms. So the reason I've got a racy heart isn't because I'm about to have a heart attack, or isn't because there's something bad about to happen, but it's because my heart's pumping to get that fuel around my body. The reason my body feels my legs and arms feel tight isn't because something bad's about to happen. It's not because I'm sick or anything like that. It's because my brain's making my arms ready in case I need to fight, my legs ready in case they need to flee. The reason, a big one, is vomiting. So some kids do vomit because during anxiety, anything that's not absolutely essential for survival shuts down, and one of those is digestion, and that can actually make them feel butterflies,
nauseated, yes,
right now, like they're going to vomit. So there's all those symptoms, and they're on my website. They're in the book, but they are on the website.
Great, yes.
If kids can understand where these symptoms come from, then what we say is, so what's happening to you is really understandable and really normal. Mm-hmm. But what you need to do is be the boss of your brain so you can switch it off when there actually is no need to fight or flee. And strong, deep breaths are a really great way to be the boss of your brain again, and it'll stop those feelings. It'll help you stop those thoughts. It doesn't mean you won't worry, but the way I describe that information, I do think that information's key, because if you think about it, like they're walking around in a room without the lights on and they're bumping into things. So they've got this anxiety, but they don't know why it's happening, and it just keeps happening, and there's no reason for it to happen, and it feels scary. When we switch the light on, those things are still there, but they can navigate around them. So it's that information, and it makes sense why they have to turn left instead of right to swing around.
That makes sense.
So that's what we're doing. And otherwise, if they don't have that scaffold of that information, breathing doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's why often if you tell someone to breathe when they're anxious, it won't do anything because an anxious brain's a really busy brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it often needs to be practiced out of anxiety so it can become a more automatic response, and it's easier to access. But also, kids aren't going to practice breathing because they're like, well, we breathe all the time. That's silly. But you go, yeah, but you don't breathe like this all the time.
Right, exactly.
You actually have to be able to breathe like this when your body's telling you really hard to breathe short, sharp breaths.
Right.
You need to go, no, actually, we're going to breathe strong, deep breaths because we don't need this fight or flight right now. So
it's a lot of incredible information. That if they have this information, then they feel like they're in charge of their brains and they're able to do something when they start to feel anxious. But I think you're right. I think kids love information and they do want to feel savvy, especially when it's in terms of their own bodies and their own brains. So yeah. I really appreciate all of that information, and I have no doubt that people will be interested in seeing all of your articles and everything that you've written about anxiety in your book. Can you give us the resource of the week, where they can go to get all of this information?
So on my site, heysigmund.com, there are probably two things. One is the book, which is Hey Warrior. Now that's a scaffold. That's all the information that it's a kid's book. It's like a 5-minute read.
Mm-hmm.
That's the information that they need. And that information, they might need it quite a few times. So that book might need to be read quite a few times.
Sure.
That information is also in an article called Anxiety in Kids, How to Turn It Around.
Mm-hmm.
So if they just either Google or if they go to my site and go anxiety in kids, and in the search bar, which is in the top right corner, go anxiety in kids, how to turn it around. That's actually the information that's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the book is more child friendly. So
and I'll also have the links to those articles on my show notes, so people don't have to go fishing around.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be right there, and there'll be a link to your book as well, so that people don't need to wonder what was it? What do I have to put in there? So that they can get the information. And I think, my goodness, I feel like I had a master class on anxiety today. I feel so much more knowledgeable about how to counsel my own children about it and how to understand it within the body, what to do before, what to do during, and what to do after. And that is just an incredible gift. So thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. I loved all the information that you gave about exactly what to say, because I think that's the area that we get tripped up on, and really what to do in that moment. It's so funny to me when I think about a child who's having a really profound response, and you're saying things like calm down or reprimanding them, and it is it just becomes silly because of course they've shut down and they're not hearing you at that point, and it's great to hear the reasoning behind it. And also what you can do in that situation, just to put high beams on that, which is, reminding them that they're safe, that you're there for them, that, even if you're not on, right next to them, that you are there for them when they're in need, and you don't leave them alone, but you respect them and what they need in that moment. So thank you very much. I really feel like we've all learned a whole lot. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. And you asked really great questions. I love when I'm asked great questions and I go, oh, yeah, I want people to know that.
Oh,
so thank you.
You're so welcome. Well, I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I know you have yours, so let's discuss them. Come up on Facebook. Let's go to the Dr. Robyn Silverman page, or let's chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com or twitter.com/Dr. Robyn. And we'll be talking to Karen too, and she'll be chiming in as well. So, keep coming with your questions. And if you love this podcast like I did, I hope you'll go up to iTunes and rate and review it so other people can hear what Karen has to say about anxiety. My goodness, like like I said, it's like a master class and you really want to hear this information. And I'm also up on Instagram. So anybody who wants to chime in over there, we're all over the place and we're going to be communicating about this podcast episode in every area. That's all the time we have for today, my fellow parents, leaders, and educators. Thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. That's where the show notes will be, and some great podcasts are up there. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even when things are not going right, you know what? You've got this. You're here. You're getting the information you need. I know you're thinking back to different points when maybe you said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing. Hey, we've all been there. Never forget there's always tomorrow. Parenting is the ultimate do-over. And I'm right there with you. As there are moments when we doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet sanity, please know you are 10 times the parent you think you are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please tune in again and keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.